So good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody joining us, or everybody rewatching the broadcast, considering nobody has the link yet. Great to welcome you all into Equine Town Hall number 34. It is the 20th of August. And we're happy to share one more interesting town hall. Let's get this up and running.
Hi everyone.
Yeah, we could consider doing one of those stream start and countdown with a video until people start joining. Those are usually used when you expect people to come and join, but we got used to kind of talking until people are here. I think it's still a reasonable approach. We already have a couple of viewers who are not waiting for the link, but actually checking YouTube, so I appreciate that. Hi, Miran. Good to see you around. We'll also be joined this time by our friend and colleague, George Flerovsky from MLabs. George has been great assistance to getting this project built on Cardano. Hi, Craig. Hi, Aero Creator. Hi, Escobar. Hi, Tomo. Great to see you guys around. Always happy when I see Nick is frozen again. No, he's
That's just unmoving.
Yeah. Wasn't that George's Twitter handle, swiftly unmoving? Or something. Hi, Mountain Mike. Hi, Javier. Hi, Tales of George. Oh, George is here.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you. Hi, George. Great to see you. We are. Yeah.
There you go.
We're live, by the way. Yeah, we're just waiting for people to join. We usually wait a few minutes.
Okay, great.
And yeah, we have a lively audience of about 9, if the number is right. Hi, look.
Cool.
Okay, then. I think it's about 5 minutes past the usual, let's say, official starting time. So it might be right to just start, and then we go back. I guess anybody who can just go back to the recording. So yeah, without further ado, we will start with the contents for Town Hall number 34. Just a reminder to anybody who may have missed the announcements, we are joined this time by the lovely George Flerovsky, part of the MLabs team. Start team was building, I'd say, a majority of our blockchain implementation for Equine. And we've recently come up with George with a presentation that we shared on our YouTube channel. If you've missed that, please do give that a look. A lot of effort was put into that presentation that explains, I would say, in a more general sense, the technical part, or a part of the technical, let's say, components of the blockchain workings behind. So yeah, that's just a very general, let's say, introduction that doesn't give George nor the MLabs contribution justice. But we'll get to that. We'll have a section where maybe George can give us a bit of a general comment. No need to redo the presentation, but just a general comment on this part as well, where we'll also be happy to receive questions, comments from anyone who's either watched the presentation or just has any questions on that. But before that, we just go through the usual schedule. So we'll be going through art, development, marketing, and our usual AMA. And we've left the art part a bit short. We basically made a new and improved pipeline for crowd rendering. Obviously, you've seen the trailer that we've had didn't have any crowds. We're kind of ironing out the system to use. We had a concept. The pipeline we had wasn't really great for that. We didn't have enough control, so it wasn't really as good as we wanted. We now have a new pipeline that is really practical. It's been tested to produce the assets that we need. So that means much more control. Now we're kind of just picking the models so they represent the usual, let's say, race goer appearance. But even that's just optimization. It's not really necessary for the game to run. Also, we've been working with 3D artists on trophy models. Trophies are gonna basically be used as icons for feature races to show a group 1 race, group 2 race, group 3 race, and so on. So instead of drawing them, we made them in 3D so we can also use them in the 3D viewer. But we're also gonna render them as small icons that will show on group races. That's a detail, but that's what the art team has been working on. And over to Nick on the development side.
Yep. Basically, we've been working with a game designer. He's been going over everything and making sure that all the numbers are set in stone, or at least that everything is really designed properly for everything. So some of the numbers for handicaps, we went over, made sure everything worked. And for the training, the actual effect on the stats when you pick your training plans and everything, that was visited and then revisited and talked amongst ourselves. We finally decided on a mix of deterministic and randomness that we're satisfied with as a first iteration, and that you guys can then tell us if you like it or not. Unsexy, but on the DevOps side, I put a lot of work in making sure the repo was really good for our dev. We have a full-time dev working with me. He's been sick, but now he's back. And we wanted a good environment so that we can iterate quickly and fix the problems in the app quickly. So that took a bit of time, but it's really necessary. And now we can easily just, open the app on the test net, open the app on the main net, and have those, check those out and make sure that everything's worked locally so that we can publish easily fixes for that. The app on the servers. On the blockchain part, our dev has been working on the breeding. Pretty much all the transactions have been written out as contracts, not smart contracts, just making sure that all the data that comes in, all the data that comes out is right, and the transactions have been created and tests have been built for most of them. So the breeding technical part, basically, of creating the transactions for all the interactions that you will need in equine. So basically using your breeding tokens, creating breeding tokens, everything you need to do for breeding will be ready. That also entailed a few indexer updates. So basically we can, some of the data we need to keep track of for breeding needs to be programmed properly so that we can send SIP86 updates and get those picked up and get all that data saved into the database properly. So basically we're still putting a lot of updates out for breeding, but it's going very quickly. A lot of the work that's been done in the forefront for the blockchain part is paying off, and also this part doesn't use a smart contract, so it's fundamentally a bit simpler than racing. So that's what went on in the last 2 weeks.
I like the usage of the word dramatically to compensate for the lack of sexiness on the DevOps side. But yeah, I mean, I've seen a demo. I like what's been done there. It's hard, I think, to appreciate that element unless somebody is actually either working on it or actually looking at it. But yeah, it's great to see. As I was telling everyone earlier, the blockchain part is also now approaching the finish line. And as you were also saying earlier, the 3D viewer part is now appearing to be basically probably going to be the latest or last, basically, to be ready for release. but we're
Yep.
we're pushing that along. All right, marketing.
Yeah, so a few things here. We will have a small, although not physical, meaning we are not going unless, Fahad, I haven't heard of your plans on this, but we will have some presence in Crypto Expo in Dubai on the booth for the it was Exploring Cardano, right? If I remember correctly, Discover Cardano booth. So we'll have our trailer there, and basically we'll have our presence even if we physically cannot make it there, which is cool. And then next week will be the Guild Invitational, right? So this is a bit of a change of the pace for our monthly invitationals. This time we decided to make it a bit more related to the guilds that exist, and thank you for everyone who already submitted and their horses. The registration will close today at 10 p.m. UTC, and then we'll go with our standard approach. The finals will be with two classes, 135 and under and 136 plus, and we'll have the typical prize pool plus the NFT poster for the guild for the guilds. And then as Fahad already mentioned, we have a really cool video released with MLabs on how the smart contracts of Equine are working. So this is on our YouTube. You can definitely see it, and we have George here with us to maybe tell a bit more about this and answer any questions, right? So we will obviously move now, let the George talk, and then we will have him for AMA if there will be any questions coming up. So yeah, that's all.
Thank you, Marek, and over to you, George.
Thank you, Fahad. Yeah, so let's speak briefly about the equine racing smart contracts. So sometime last year, when Equine first approached us at MLabs, we talked about the general equine application, the various components, racing, breeding, trading, metadata, and we kind of brainstormed for each of these pieces what would be required. And very early on, we identified that for the racing part of the game, we would definitely need to use smart contracts, Pluto Space smart contracts. Why? Because when you race in equine, we want you to lock in your horse towards that race, right? So it's kind of introducing a bit of physicality to the digital blockchain world, where if you send your horse to participate in this race, you can't simultaneously have your horse participate in a whole bunch of races as well. And so to do that on the blockchain, you need to lock in your horse into a smart contract. Similarly, for some races, there is an entrance fee. So correspondingly, that entrance fee needs to be sent into the race. And then since that entrance fee funds prizes, then we couldn't make it as simple as, oh, just send us the entry fee and we'll figure it out. We wanted to go the extra step and say that if the entrance fee is funding the prize pool, then we want smart contracts to guarantee that it will go towards the prize pool. And as well, since you are sending the horse into a race, we want to make sure that no matter what happens in the race, you can always retrieve back your horse. So that's why we decided to use smart contracts for racing. Can we go to the next slide, Fahad? Just the one with the workflow, and I can just go over it at a high level.
Yeah, I only had the cover on this presentation.
Oh, you only had the cover. No worries, no worries.
No.
I
can do that. I had it ready actually. Chrome makes it very easy to do these things live. You wanted this?
Yeah. So the workflow that we landed on with equine racing is we wanted to have an upfront announcement for each race, where as many details as we can reveal are put into the announcement, and everything that we can't reveal at that moment. And the reason why we can't reveal it is because a race should have a little bit of unpredictability, because if you knew everything in advance, why would you participate, since you know exactly what's going to happen? So everything that is still unrevealed, we put hashes in, so that it keeps us honest. It pins us down to what we're going to use to introduce a little bit of randomness into the race. And all of this is put in upfront in the race announcement, so that before any horses enter into the race and any entrance fees are paid into the race, you know that all of this information that can be revealed to you, and you know that all the rest of the information has been committed to. So it can't be changed after the fact, after you've registered your horses. Speaking of which, then, once you've seen the announcement, you're able to register for the race. And based on who registers into the race, which horses, we use a randomized algorithm, for which the random seed comes from the race announcement, or the random seed that gets used in the randomization is committed in the race announcement. We use that to assign horses to gates and to matchups against each other. At that moment, we also reveal the specific track conditions and weather conditions that your horses will be facing on the track when they actually do go up against the other horses. You're giving an opportunity to scratch out of the race. In case you get some cold feet, you're like, oh my God, these horses that I'm facing are a little too crazy. And then when it's time, the horses burst out of the gates, and we simulate, or equine simulates, everything in very beautiful 3D renderings, and you can kind of follow along and cheer for your horse, and kind of hope that it wins. Once it wins, the results of the race are posted on chain. Winners can collect their rewards, and then everybody grabs their horses and goes home. So that's basically the equine racing flow overall. Smart contracts. So as I mentioned, the reason why you would want to use smart contracts is because wallets are custodial. That's the main thing. With wallets, the only thing that a wallet can check or has influence over is signing a transaction. So if your horses are being held under a wallet address, the only thing that you can do with that is, when there's a transaction, you can check, has that transaction been signed by that wallet or not? And that's inconvenient for racing an equine, because it would essentially force you to send your horses and your fees directly to equine, just for the purposes of having your horses participate in the race. So that's a little bit inconvenient. Whereas with smart contracts, the actual rules of the smart contract can take a look at the entirety of the transaction. And you can encode various complex logic in there as well. And so smart contracts are good for non-custodial arrangements and flows. So that's why we use them there. Next slide. So as I mentioned, because we're using smart contracts, equine doesn't hold horses' entrance fees during the race. And there are specific prescribed actions that all the players, or all the various roles, have during the race. So for example, equine can cancel a race, but horse owners are guaranteed to be able to get back their horse and entrance fees if that happens. Similarly, if equine doesn't do something on its side, announcing race results or announcing gate assignments based on the random simulation, then your stuff isn't stuck inside of the smart contracts. We have a safety valve that makes sure that you're able to get everything back. Next slide. So I already talked about the race announcement. So specifically, we put the description in, the start time, registration deadline, and fee, some information about the racetrack, conditions for scratching, and the reward distribution schedule or details. Fairness and reproducibility, I touched on this a little bit. The main point here is that we're using deterministic algorithms to do both the gate assignment and the race simulations. And then we inject randomness into those deterministic algorithms via two things, mainly the random seed, which we commit to at the moment when the race is announced, and the other piece of randomness that gets injected into the race is which specific horses actually registered for the race and how many of them were there, right? That's another kind of moving part that gets settled out after the announcement. But the random seed that we use, we commit to it at the moment that the race is announced, and we put a hash in the announcement so that we can't go back and change our minds later on. And this means that, in principle, an independent third party should be able to, if they obtain the racing engine code that corresponds to the hash of the code that we post in the announcement, and they have the racing random seed, they should be able to just simulate the race with the same selection of horses and obtain the exact same outcomes, right? And if they don't, then you know that something changed in between the race announcement and the racing results. So this is how Equine wants to introduce fairness and reproducibility into its races. Next slide. Registration is very simple. You simply send your horse and the entrance fee to our entrance point in the smart contract before the registration deadline, and you indicate which race you want to participate in. And you're able to kind of customize things. So you can attach the jockey that will be racing your horse. You can customize your horse skin and the jockey skin as well.
Obviously,
but the jockey and skin tokens, they don't get put into the smart contract. You get them back. Sorry, Fahad.
No, I was saying also, obviously, this is the technical part, but for the users, you'll also be doing this with the front end using buttons, right? It's not. This is how it works.
Yes.
There's going to be a button that does that for them.
Yeah. So when I talk about applications and smart contracts, I like to talk about everyone as if they're manually doing stuff, because it's easier for me to think of it this way. And then, once we have all that figured out, we kind of go back and we say, all right, this can be automated, that can be automated, that can be automated, that can be automated. And also these things here can be done a little bit more conveniently via the front end, right? But in my layer, kind of the smart contracts, which is a little bit more back-end facing, I just talk about, okay, this guy did this guy did that, and so on. But yeah. Good point, Fahad. So gate assignment, as I mentioned, once it's time, registration is done. Equine runs a quick query to detect all the horses that register to the race. We filter in all the horses that are compliant with the race condition, or like race rules and conditions, and then we randomly match them up and assign them to gates. And once we've done that, we post that on chain so everybody can see, along with the racetrack and weather conditions. So I think we can probably go quickly through the rest of the slides. So next slide. Scratching. So as I mentioned, once you see which horses you're competing against and what the racetrack and weather conditions are, you have a chance to get out of the race or to get your horse out of the race. But there is a scratching fee, which is simply a percentage of the entrance fee, just to kind of keep people committed when they're racing. They know that there's a cost involved in terms of backing out. So just to be fair to the other participants. The simulation is probably something that Nick and Fahad could probably talk a lot more about. I kind of summarized it a bit here in this slide. So the main thing is that Nick has been driving a very awesome, sophisticated physics model for all the horses, moving around and in front of each other and jockeying towards the finish line. And it's really cool. And I guess as well with the 3D renderings that kind of emerged from that, I think it'll be really cool to see some of the first races happen on Equine when that finally gets shipped. So
soon.
Yeah. And then finally, I mean, once the results are available based on that simulation and we post them on chain, the winners are actually able to claim their prizes from the smart contract without Equine having to do anything. So that's what the smart contracts are there for. Like, you just claim your prizes and you take your horses as you exit the race. So that's basically it. And that concludes my presentation. We can do questions, I guess.
Yeah, we can. There's one AMA question actually, I think, which kind of know the answer for, but also does touch, I think, on this to an extent. Make sure I just switch to the right presentation. So let's start with this one. I guess it's between you and Nick. I don't know if Nick is still unmoving. That would be impressive. Feels like he's not flinched for several tens of minutes. after a race, will prize money be paid automatically, or will some action be required of players? After a race, will horses be returned to player watch automatically, or will players be required to do something to reclaim them?
George, you want to go?
Yeah. So this is where that distinction that I was talking about, how we, like in the smart contract, think of it, and how it actually happens in real life with when you start integrating with the full platform and with the front end and everything. So at the smart contract level, the smart contract dictates that the prize money can be paid out to the winners, right? And the prize money is held by the smart contracts, but really anybody can do it. So on the blockchain level, anybody can submit a transaction that fits within the rules of that smart contract, and channels the prize money towards the winner. But practically, from the perspective of the equine platform, this will be automated. So we will have bots that will just distribute the prize money to the players according to the smart contracts logic, right? So you won't have to worry about physically having to go in and like claim your prize money and spend a transaction fee to do it and everything. So
eventually, right? I think like there's an initial plan of this being manual and then being transitioned to an automated workflow, right?
Yeah, possibly for the testnet release and the beta and everything, you might have to claim your own horses back out. But we'll be looking into having the Oracle bot do that. So at some point, the bot will just send everybody back their stuff. But as George said, anyway, it's designed as in a way that the smart contract could make it so that even a random stranger could come in and return you your horses and would be unable to do anything else but give you your prize money and your horses. Everything else is an illegal transaction. That's the point and the beauty of smart contracts. And since we designed it that way, then the Oracle bot can just randomly come by and give everybody back, not randomly, but on purpose, come by and give everybody back their horses and prize money. You could do that. You could do that for a friend. Anybody could do it. But the only thing you can do is the right thing and return people their horses and prize money correctly. So,
thank you. There's one more question, which is, I guess, has some implication on the blockchain side and one that doesn't. But I'll also invite the audience here who are with us in the live broadcast. If anybody has any question for George that touches on the blockchain part of the game and how it's been developed or how it's meant to work, basically, please feel free to send the questions, whether it's in the chat here or over on Discord. We're still monitoring the ideas and questions channel. But I'll do the other questions in the meantime and see if there's any others. There is a long post, actually. I'm just taking, I guess, the most important, let's say, our core part. And I think it's more of a suggestion than a question, but I still thought it's good to talk about this. So it's a proposal or a suggestion that there should be outside wagers. Just like real horse races, the fact that there's entry fees, it means like owning a horse also implies that you need to keep paying to enter, which I think is actually, let's say, a little bit more realistic, even though the betting industry or the gambling industry does fund a majority of the sport in real life, and there is no denying that nor avoiding it, and we're aware of that aspect. But here, I would say, still entering horses into races is not very far from the costs of owning a horse, and that implication, except probably at a much smaller scale, as one side. But on the suggestion itself of allowing outside wagers, there was a suggestion built around even like how it can be built and the percentages and all that, saying a percentage or a cut can be kept for the platform, another percentage can be distributed between the participating horses and so on. And then it followed with discussion about if law is your problem, you should have thought about it before building a game like this, etc., which is not really. We've always cited legalities. That's one of the reasons, and obviously regulation is different for a game of this type. If it did have wagering, it is not the only, let's say, reason. Another part of it is for business reasons, and also on basically focus on the platform itself. We don't want to spread ourselves too thin across all of these sites. So we're looking at the platform itself is the racing, let's say, tracks, horses, and the ecosystem. Now, when I see ecosystem, we're also broadening the scope to many larger options. And this is part of the beauty of seeing this as a decentralized system is, what do we gain from this being on the blockchain? What's the point of this being on the blockchain? There's a lot of them revolve around ownership and the value of true ownership and making sure basically players have control over their assets, the decentralization of that. But then the other part is also, instead of us controlling who gets access to the data, a lot of the data is on-chain and can be accessed by anyone who wants to build a platform that uses this. So part of, I would say, a response to this is, while we maintain our reasons to not directly build a wagering platform for a coin ourselves, we are still saying that we encourage basically builders to come and build any tools or platforms that build into the ecosystem. And I think sooner rather than later, we'll be able to also basically share with these interested developers how they can integrate this. But with the testnet coming up and all that, people will be able to also to see the transactions and how they can handle them. Now, my point is, these structures that were suggested can be built by anyone. Anyone interested in this business model and thinking that it can be profitable can come and build a platform for wagering on equine horses. They can monitor these as they go in and out. They can monitor the results. And even the distribution can be built in as a part of promotion. If you want to build a wagering platform, you want the horse owners to support you, you give them part of the cut if you want to. And then they will be more interested in also sharing this platform, etc. I know in our discussion with MLabs, they are extremely open to all of these possibilities being open to the extent possible, even to the extent of, we have a vision, I think, together, not for version 1 or maybe probably not anytime soon, but there is a vision for a V2, which is even more open and broad. And again, at the risk of promising features, I'm just saying that that vision could extend to the level of not only equine can create races. If we have a smart contract that allows anybody to create races and put their own rules, that could be a whole different, for example, expansion. But that's not something we're doing or supporting now. We will be the sole, let's say, authority over running races at this moment. But the fact that majority is on the blockchain, I think, allows it. George, if you can maybe elaborate or kind of share a little bit on, let's say, part of this value of a coin being on the blockchain and the potential for third-party applications.
Yeah, honestly, I thought your answer hit the nail on the head. All the information about the races that it would be required for a gambling application gets posted on chain, and it gets revealed at the appropriate times that you would need for a gambling application. So you know when the race is announced, you know kind of what the rules of it are and everything, and you know what the conditions are for horses that want to participate and so on. When the horses are assigned to matchups and gate assignment and gates, you kind of know everything that you needed before the actual race is executed and the horses participate. And then once it gets resolved, you see the results. That's really all you need for a gambling application to access in order to to work. And all of this gets posted on the blockchain in the immutable ledger. So that should be sufficient for a gambling application to be able to rely on that information. In particular, because, as I mentioned, any information that isn't revealed at an earlier stage of a race still gets committed and hashed into the announcement or into the gate assignment and so on. And I think it's probably a good thing to sort of have gambling be a separate modular component that someone could create, because that allows you to build a gambling platform that is able to deal with equine and with other potential applications out there that people may want to place wagers on in a sort of unified perspective. And I think, honestly, that's the future of blockchain. In the first year and a half or so after the Pluto smart contracts came out on Cardano, everybody was focusing on building their own sort of sandboxed applications without a lot of interactions between them. We're starting to enter into the era on Cardano when applications can reference each other's state and allow people to do something more to enrich it, right? We're getting into the realm of, we're starting to get into the realm of interconnected apps. So I would be surprised if no one decides to create a gambling application that, among other games, also allows people to place wagers on, on equine horse races. So I think it'd be cool. And I mean, MLabs, we're here to build it for you if you need it. So,
nobody knows the intricacies more than MLabs. That was a shameless plug, but I think it's allowed by virtue of you being invited here. But it's props to MLabs. This is, I think, a reference and support on this, let's say, a cooperation. And I think it doesn't end with gambling. I think it's like analytics and forecasting or planning. Even like when I said planning, I mean some members, for example, have suggested that we build a note-taking function where people can place notes about their horses for their own breeding program, etc. But the way it's meant to be is that like anyone interested can also build third-party tools that allow these kind of things where you can always have the horses up to date and you can like put things together that allow this. Let me make sure, would users be able to skip the transaction builder and actually in their own, let's say, custom third-party apps also build shortcuts to do stuff, like enter horses into races, for example, technically speaking?
Yeah, I mean, as long as, like, that's the beauty of the blockchain, right? You have these smart contracts. If you know what's required, the rules of the on-chain smart contracts, then you can build your own transactions and comply with those rules. That sounds fairly simple. Sometimes it's a little bit more involved to figure out how exactly to reliably build, transactions that comply with the smart contract logic. But in principle, it should be possible for third-party apps to be able to do that. Right. So that's in terms of like building transactions that interact with the smart contracts. Analytics, of course, should be even easier because, if there's state, like most of the equine state is contained on the blockchain. The only thing that isn't contained is some of the private information about, the specifics of like the horse DNA and some of the, the racing engine code and stuff. But the actual things that are on like the public record or stuff like that, that's on the blockchain, and you're able to access it using analytics. You're able to run your various crazy, Moneyball data analytics routines and stuff to figure out various things about particular horses and races and stuff like that. So you don't really need equine to do anything on that. You can go in and you can analyze the blockchain yourself and what's going on it.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think when we talk about third-party integrations, we do run, I guess, a risk of implying, let's say, some functionality that some may be incentivized to do, things like bots that allow people to enter their horses into the first available race, etc. But in some cases, that is welcomed, especially for like instanced races. In some others, they may not be. But I think we may not be able to prevent that depending on what it is and how it is. But I think we're all ready to pivot and adjust basically as needed. But yeah, thanks for that insight. There was another question which was about the white paper. Will you publish an updated white paper, and if so, when? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've been working on it for a while now. Actually, it's Craig who's with us here in chat, if he's still watching. It's one of the things on his table, and he's actually like gone back and forth on it a few times in a few review rounds. Obviously, one of the reasons that it wasn't ready as we hoped is that Craig has been prioritizing some of his time with, I think rightly so, on some game design aspects that actually needed to be implemented or considered in the game while it's being coded versus updating documentation, so that we don't hold the development, let's say, late or delay that. But yeah, and Craig also, I think, responded to the same comment in Discord, saying that whether it's going to be called a white paper or a guide is at our discretion. but there is something that's being written that updates, including all of the, let's say, new details of race types, schedules, etc., etc. I don't think we've gotten any other questions on Discord, nor on this chat here, which I guess means everything is clear.
For the white paper, if I may, I think if anybody in the audience wants to suggest certain aspects that they would like to be better described in the white paper when the updated one comes out, I guess we should encourage people to suggest it on Discord or wherever, just so that we're covering the topics that people are interested in that document, right? And maybe elaborating on some of those technical details.
Absolutely. And I think, there's part of it is the technical detail, especially on the blockchain part. But I think also a lot of the interest was on the game design aspect. Some players are especially curious about things which may affect. And this is part of the challenge of building a blockchain game, and especially one that involves these kind of, let's say, variable assets like the horses, is that each horse has a certain, let's say, stat spec, and there are assumptions that go into people's, for example, purchasing decisions from the secondary market and selling as well, and there's a lot of that. And we as game, let's say, designers and developers always try to shy away from, let's say, intentionally, let's say, changing what could affect perception of value by changing game design. But and I guess this is a problem that non-NFT or non-blockchain games, where the assets are locked into the game and there's no resale, don't really need to worry about. Like, if you nerf a character, well, a shame if you play that character, but there's no other implication. Whereas if it's a stat or a feature that people may have purchased with money, then it becomes much more challenging, let's say, decision to make. So we have to make sure that the gain is more than the pain, I guess, is the consideration. And one of the things I think, George, you might be aware of is like the jockeys being sent into smart contract and returned. There is a long debate within the community after this was shared, where some were objecting to this, saying we basically loaded up on a lot of jockeys, thinking that they also had the effect of unlocking simultaneous utility. Whereas if I had 5 identical jockeys, I could enter 5 different jockeys at the same time, because they would be held up, when instead we said each jockey represents an ability to use a jockey, but you can use it simultaneously across 10 different races. So my point is that, that game design choice could impact some people's decisions or assumptions, when some people had assumed that it was one way or another. So I think that was why a lot of, let's say, community members are keen to get a white paper that describes all of these details.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
There was a question earlier in the week if guilds are mandatory for gameplay. I think we answered it, but just to make sure it's answered, they are not. And guilds are meant to be an optional social function. We realize that Discord exists for that reason. We realize that other community platforms exist, but we wanted to have at least a basic option like the chat function and the guilds function, in case people have get value out of that. But we're also playing with different ways to let's say, also enrich the guild experience. We have a lot of ideas. Obviously, implementing ideas takes time and money, so we don't want to prioritize that when all of you are waiting to race. But there are a lot of ideas about things like in-platform guild races, and there's a lot of other ideas. Obviously, originally when we had a marketplace plan, that was also some utility that we've cancelled for now. But guilds are not mandatory. They will be optional, and the player can basically play without having a race. There's a suggestion here from Mountain Mike saying farming consists of entering races, receiving an equine token that could be sold or staked. You'd receive prizes for winnings as well. Yeah, these are interesting concepts that we have been playing with actually since the game was ideated. We don't want to commit to them, mainly because it still is not the core of the game. The core of the game is racing and breeding. I think with this base, it is much more feasible to consider these options. And I think the way you described it as being, let's say, activity points, where if you play, you're gonna get some points back whether you win or lose. That might have an interesting, let's say, cycle or loop where you can grind for those points and do stuff with it. But we don't want that taking away from the core. So we're leaving that until we have, let's say, when we have launch out of the way and we're in that product market fit or scaling, let's say, phases, we can also look into where those can add value to the game. But yeah, the potential is there. We're just not committing to that yet. Yeah, I think this concludes a very, there is one question which doesn't want to show here. I think it's because we updated this, but I'll read it out anyway. So it's a question from Alex, Crypto10023 on Twitter. It says, only one question: if you would put a percentage of where you are with releasing beta MVP, are you at 50% at this point or maybe more? That was, I think, very generous, I guess, or the opposite of that, including design, smart contract stuff, game development, and time for all that to come together. While putting a number is not really the easiest when you look at the full scope of things, I would say we're much, 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 much farther than that. And I would say we're somewhere between, realistically speaking, I would say between the 85 and 90% range is probably fair. I would say the app, as in the website and the front ends are, well, they were built and they're just, let's say, pending some tweaks. The blockchain part is close to completion. The 3D viewer is pretty advanced, as in we have races already running with horses. It doesn't look magnificent, but we can already give it a race and it gives a full sequence of a race, sorry. And yeah, we're in this integration phase. So I would say it's nowhere close to 50%. I would say it's very close to between 85 and 90% is probably realistic. And I would say also, I don't think what we're releasing is an MVP. I think it's a little bit more than that. By virtue of how it's built, it's a blockchain game, so you kind of have to build to scale to an extent. You can't really skip that phase. But yeah, I think we did skip, I think, a majority of what's expected to be an MVP, and I think we're jumping straight to something a little bit beyond or more of an MVP. Maybe is an understatement even. But yeah, and yeah, the trap or the trick question of time for all that to come together, I'm not answering that. It's ready when it's done. But yeah, I like saying soon, and I would say sooner than it was a week ago is probably a good answer as well. I hope that's satisfying enough. But yeah, we are not timing this or intentionally delaying any of this. We are building as fast as we can, and we hope to launch as fast as we can. We're just not gonna. We don't want to launch a product that is not up to the par that we're working at. And yeah, that's the answer. So yeah, big thank you first of all to George for gracing us with his presence, and first of all, delivering the brilliant presentation on our YouTube channel. Again, have a look at that if you haven't, but also giving this mini presentation today and answering the questions. Working with you guys has always been great. And I think the audience and the community as a whole, I think, will appreciate what we've built together much, much more when they get a chance to interact with it. But big thanks to you and the MLabs team for this excellent collaboration.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I'll echo that as well. It's been a complete pleasure to work with you, Fahad, and Nick, day to day, weekly. It's been a very collegial relationship, and we've just been kind of calmly working away at the various issues as they come up. And yeah, very enjoyable. Thank you.
Thank you, George. And again, thank you to our lovely community and active audience for the participation, always joining our town halls. We really appreciate that. It encourages us to keep holding these town halls. It's really happy to know that our community is actually interested in what we're building and the progress, which is not often the case with blockchain or NFT projects. So that's really, I'd say, refreshing. Again, just a word of thanks to everyone. We appreciate your unwavering support. Thank you to Nick and Marek for co-hosting this with me. And yeah, this is Fahad from the Equine team signing out.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. And yeah, it's been a pleasure. Likewise, working with MLabs. Just wanted to get that out there. Thank you, guys.
Bye, everybody.
Okay.
Bye.
Everyone.
Bye.